All right, hi guys, I'm Erika. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Skookum, and today I'd like to talk to you about building effective product teams. So as Dustin mentioned, I started my career at Skookum nearly 4 years ago. I was hired as a product strategist, and throughout that time I've built out our product and design departments, and I'm currently in the process of building out our marketing function. Now, before we dive into specifics, I feel it's important that I set some background for you all. So I'd like to start out with a couple of confessions, and there are 3. So number 1, I was hired as an experiment. I had never done product in this capacity before, and I didn't think I was qualified. So let me go back and kind of elaborate on each of these points. I was hired as an experiment, so you can ask our CEO, James Hartzell. He will totally corroborate this story. He's the one that hired me, and he's who I report to today. I wasn't hired as a manager or a director or some fancy C-suite executive, which, to be clear, I'm never going to be a fancy executive. I was hired because it seemed like I knew a few things about product management, and maybe I could figure out how to do it successfully here. At that time, Skookum was looking to make the transition from tactical dev shop, where clients say, here's what I want you to build, go build it, don't ask questions, to strategic software partner, where clients say, here's the business problem, what's the best way to solve it with technology? And so throughout my interview process with James and Brian, I had spent a lot of time talking with them about my experience in product and how I believe that kind of function could help them achieve their strategic goals. And they trusted me just enough to give me a chance to prove that I could do the work that I said was needed. So I had never done product in this capacity, right? So I used to be a product manager at a software company. So I did product at a products company. I'd never worked in a professional services capacity before. And the type of product management that needs to happen here when you're working with clients is very different from how you might run things within a software company. And that ultimately made me question whether or not I could do product effectively here, and if that type of work was even going to be valued by our clients. So I say these 3 things because there's probably a handful of you in the audience that you have an opportunity, somebody's willing to take a chance on you, you've never done the work exactly before, and you're probably questioning whether or not you can. And I want you to know that I was in your shoes, and I'm in your shoes again as the CMO, because as you continue to advance in your career, the cycle resets where you're stretching and you're taking an opportunity where you've got experience but you've never done that job role maybe exactly, and that's a good thing because it means that you're pushing yourself and you're growing. So my hope today is to inspire you to take that chance and to equip you with some tools and tactics to help you feel more comfortable and prepared. So here's how I did it. This isn't the complete playbook, but there are 4 tactics that I want to talk about today, and I think these are probably 4 of the most important things. These are philosophies that I've kind of constantly been honing throughout my career. There's probably at least 5 more tactics here that I could talk about, but wanted to pull out what I believe to be the most critical ones when you're building teams. I didn't walk into Skookum with this playbook, but this is what I've come to learn throughout my experience. So these tactics are solve the problems you have today, hire for growth, plan acute, and communicate your vision constantly. So let's start with solve the problems you have today. This is a really great quote from the book Getting Real by 37 Signals, and if you're in software and you've never read it before, I highly recommend it. They say people often spend too much time up front trying to solve problems they don't even have yet. And in the book, they give the example of Basecamp. So 37 Signals launched Basecamp without the ability to bill customers. And this is because they knew they had 30 days from the time of launch to build in that functionality. You know, on launch day, they didn't even know if anybody would sign up. And when you're a small team and resources are constrained, you cannot afford to work on things that might not be needed. So they needed to focus on acquiring customers and providing a very simple project management experience so that people would want to renew at the end of the month and they would want to pay for this service. Okay, so solve the problems that you have today. For me, 4 years ago, you know, I first needed to figure out how do we talk about product and design in a way that clients will understand and perceive as valuable. Before I even got to do the work, I had to prove that this was work worth doing. So I spent a lot of time with the sales team in client meetings, providing a lot of phone support, writing SOWs. You know, we didn't have the process ironed out at that point. There wasn't some giant team behind me. I mean, I was literally like pitching the work that I was then going to have to do myself. And this is like not for the faint of heart, right? Like it can be super nerve-wracking just be in these meetings all the time and have people pressing you for details and how specifically is this going to work. You know, but the key is to really listen to what the client needs and the problems that they have, and to ultimately use common sense when you're responding to questions, right? Like product management is not a new discipline. It's been around for 20 plus years. And I had done product before. So it's just about, you know, thinking critically in the moment about how you can tailor your experience and your knowledge to fit the specific needs of that project. And that's really how we did it in the beginning. So once we got over that hump, you know, the next problem then became, well, how do we keep up with sales demand? You know, now that people want to buy this type of work, it's getting to a point to where there's only so many projects that I can do at one time. So how do we staff up? And this is where I think things got really interesting. So our CEO was intent on keeping the organization as flat as possible. You know, he wanted to do that until we reached critical mass, really keep management overhead very low. So he asked me to hire 2 additional product strategists, but they weren't going to report to me. They were going to report to him, and I was going to report to him, but I was going to hire these new people. You know, it's a very different thing to hire people when you have no intention of managing them. You know, you're not thinking about career pathing or coaching or how you're going to structure a department and the processes that you're going to put in place. You're solving the problem that you have in that moment, which is if I don't bring somebody else on board, I'm literally going to drown in my workload. So we're going to spend a bit of time talking about how to hire for growth. So I'll kind of put a pin in this point. We'll come back to it in a few slides. So lastly, once you kind of figure out how to keep pace with sales demand, the next problem then becomes, well, now that we're a team of 5, how do we ensure that we're providing a consistent service experience? So you can see how each problem really builds on the next. And the goal is to validate the layer beneath before diverting a significant amount of time and energy in what's to come. And you'll see, you know, that there are a lot of parallels between this approach and how you actually build software products. You don't worry about scale when you're 3 people, and you don't worry about building a team if nobody's buying what you're selling. So I want to go back to the story about how I was asked to hire 2 people as a non-manager. Now I'm going to be completely honest with you, this was like a really weird position to be in. You know, I'm human. I wasn't given any formal management authority. So naturally, anybody that I'm going to speak with, I'm going to view them as competition. You know, you could be hiring your new boss, and I didn't want to hire my boss, right? Like, I wanted to be the boss. one day. But I was still unproven. Looking back, I think that was probably the most critical point in my career because I was standing at the base of two different paths. One was hire a bunch of junior people that would look to me for guidance, or two, hire a bunch of experienced senior people to come in and work alongside me. And I chose the latter. So ultimately what I did is I bet on myself. I believed that I had a vision for how we could do product here at Skookum. And in order to successfully execute that vision, I needed people who knew how to do the work, people who were going to challenge me, and ultimately make me uncomfortable. And if when the dust settled, James felt that I was the best person for the director job, well, then that's how I wanted to win. Smart people that make you uncomfortable are going to push you to work harder. And that energy and competition is what you need when you're building something from nothing, and speed is everything. Now, in addition to finding people that are experienced, there are 4 key attributes that I believe are necessary when building teams. I've interviewed hundreds of people with varied backgrounds ranging from product management to UX and visual design to marketers. And while this isn't an exact science, I believe that these 4 attributes are consistently indicative of high performance. And they are grit, intelligence, influence, and honesty. So let's start with grit. For a long time, I used to think about this as passion, and passion is a really good thing, but just because you're passionate about something doesn't mean that you have the courage or the resolve to see it through, when things get really tough. Grit is all about endurance. When things get hard or when momentum stalls, the grittiest people are going to continue to chip away. And let me give you an example. So several years ago, I was hiring designers, and there was one candidate in particular that we were all really excited about, but there was one odd catch. He told me that he wasn't interested in professional growth. After 2 years at a startup, he just wanted to coast for a while, had no interest in leadership, just kind of wanted to do the bare minimum. And that completely floored me, because I had never had anybody be that candid in an interview before. And it floored me, because he was candid, but also because I didn't believe him. And I struggled with this for a couple of days because that statement really didn't line up with everything that he had shared about his past and what excites him and what drives him and projects that he's worked on and how he's really set goals for himself and seen things through over a long period of time. So instinctively, I knew that he had grit, and I didn't think that this would be the case. So I took a risk, and I relocated him from Australia to the United States, and it turned out to be one of the best hiring decisions I've ever made. Not only did he continually go the extra mile for his clients and team members, he founded our night shift program, which is now the pro bono software development arm of our business. Now, some of you, I see you're smiling, you probably know who this is based on the fact that he is Australian. He recently took a job with Walmart Labs as a UX lead out in San Francisco, and we're super happy for him. This is a great next step for him and his career. Definitely a guy with grit. Intelligence. So as managers, we constantly hear hire people that are smarter than you. But what does that really mean, and how do you find those people? To me, this is all about finding people who think about problems differently than you do. Look for people who will elevate the collective talent of the team. When I interview, I like to pull in people from different departments who I know think about things differently than the candidate. Intelligence isn't necessarily about having a high IQ. It's the ability to think about things in ways that I'm not currently, or in ways that the team is not. Influence could really be a sub-bullet under intelligence, because to me, influence is largely centered on social emotional intelligence. You know, some of the smartest people I know didn't go to Ivy League schools, score high on the SATs, but they are extremely socially, emotionally intelligent, and people gravitate to them. Everything we do as product managers and designers, it touches people. You're negotiating features, you're clarifying ideas, you're empathizing with users. You could be the smartest person on the planet, but if people don't want to be around you, you will not be successful in your role. Honesty. So trust is very important for any team. It's especially important when you're working with a small group of people and you're trying to prove yourselves. To me, honesty is about having the guts to speak out against conventional wisdom. So when everybody's saying, this is what we should do, and this is why, there's somebody over here that's saying, I don't believe that to be the case, and this is why. You know, this can be really hard to suss out in an interview because people want to tell you what they think you want to hear. So what we used to do is we would run people through a product simulation or exercise. So we had one, product candidate. We asked him to evaluate a tool that we had been working on internally, and we posed the question, is this going to be a profitable endeavor for us, and would you recommend that we continue working on it? So he went off and he spent a ton of time talking to the project team, interviewing users. So we had people internally at Skookum that were using this product and externally as well. He grilled me on business objectives, and he came back and he looked us all square in the eye. You know, the project team was in the room, and he told us to abandon the product. And he was very thorough and very objective in his justification. He was the first person to ever make that recommendation, and I hired him the next day. And ultimately, we abandoned the product, and I don't think we've thought twice about it. It was the right decision. He's still on the team, and he's doing awesome. So, because these 4 attributes are largely intangible, it's going to take a lot of conversations and interviews before, I think you're really going to be able to readily spot them. In my designer example, where I knew he had grit and it was this instinctive thing, that came from experience. But that doesn't mean that you've got to spend 10 years, like as a manager, interviewing people. You can build up that experience really quickly. And the best way to do that is to talk to a lot of people. For 3 years, I was always interviewing. That was like my main self-appointed responsibility, was just get out there and talk to a lot of people. I kept the job postings up on the website year-round because I always wanted that pool of people that I could set up meetings and talk to. And it's a great way to build your pipeline so that when the need does arise, you have a pool of people that you've come to know that you can tap into pretty quickly. So talk to a lot of people and always be interviewing. All right, let's move on to, I think this is our 3rd tactic, which is plan acute. This is not a word that exists or you will find in the dictionary. This is something that I made up. And it means planning and executing simultaneously. I don't think you can ever get to the point, especially in today's day and age, especially when you're building a team, where you can say, I'm going to just go away for a month and work on my strategy, and then I'll come back and we'll go implement this beautiful plan. Because when you come back, things will have shifted, and that perfect strategy document that you've poured your soul into will no longer be relevant. We are in an age of plan acuting, so you better get good at it. And here's a framework to help you do just that. So these are our 5 bullets that I want to talk to. This is really kind of in my day-to-day, constantly what's going through my head and helping me balance planning with executing. So the first bullet is consider doing nothing. When you're building something, there are hundreds of things that you could do, and it's amazing how many people will have opinions about what you should be doing. And it can be easy to get caught up in the emotion of a new idea. But before you commit the time and energy, you need to ask yourself, what's the consequence of inaction? If I don't do anything, what will happen? Is your customer churn rate going to increase by a couple percentage points? Will employee attrition increase? Is anybody going to care except your mom? I mean, you've got to really think about, if you don't do this, what's the result? In business, we're constantly concerned with getting things done and checking things off of a list, but we can't forget that running too fast down the wrong path can be crippling. So you need to take the time to figure out what's really worth pursuing and why. And for me, it's helpful for me to look at things and say, if I don't do this, ultimately what will happen? The next point is setting time and budget constraints and then giving on scope. So fixing time and budget means that you can't do everything that is completely possible in this world. And this is a good thing because it forces you to consider what's really important. I don't have a marketing budget right now. Everything that we do from a marketing standpoint, I have to make a business case to James. We could spend time figuring out what my marketing budget should be, but I actually weirdly prefer this dynamic of having to pitch him every time that I want to do something, because it really forces me to think about, what's a value add? Sure, it would be great if I had $1 million, but what would I do with $1 million? It's very easy to just start doing things that maybe aren't valuable. So set time and budget. I like to chunk out larger initiatives and break them down into smaller projects with firm timetables and budgets. So our content strategy, for example. I'm currently in the process of writing an article for Information Age, and I'm giving myself 2 weeks calendar time, and I'm going to invest 15 hours. And so when I look at that, I know very specifically that I need to work within that timetable. And for me, it really helps me narrow in on scope and work at a manageable pace. And ultimately, I think constraints are a good thing, and it helps you become more productive, and it makes things a little less overwhelming. So the next bullet is double down on what you're good at and delegate the rest. So this is obvious, management 101. But I actually think this is one of the more challenging things to do in practice. And this is because we all want to be good at the sexy stuff, the stuff that gets the recognition and the praise, the strategy, and it can be really hard to concede that to somebody else. But the sooner you can be honest with yourself about the value you actually bring, the faster you're going to see results. So you need to think, what takes you the most time, causes you the most pain, and in the end is mediocre at best, and you need to stop doing it. All right, moving down our list, solve the easy stuff first. We can be quick to bypass what's right in front of us because it seems inconsequential. It's the big, hairy, messy stuff that causes the most anxiety, and as a result, we're naturally drawn to it, right? Because if we can solve that today, then we're not going to have to think about it tomorrow, and we can sleep easier. But momentum is essential in the early stages, especially when you're building a team and you got a couple people that you're working with and they're kind of looking to you. So being overly ambitious at the outset can quickly lead to fatigue, and it can become demotivating. So don't overlook the importance of low-hanging fruit, because you're going to need that energy to climb the rest of the tree. Make a decision and move on. It might be the wrong one. You've got a 50-50 chance. But if you've put a reasonable amount of time and effort into it, I guarantee you'll be okay. You increase your chance of success, so you increase your chance of becoming a better decision maker with each decision that you make. Because making decisions means something's going to happen, and you're going to learn from it. We make things overly complicated when we overanalyze them. So next time you find yourself sitting on your hands, you need to think, what's the bigger liability? Not making the wrong decision or not making one at all. So 5 bullet points right here on planicuting. All right, communicate your vision constantly. So this is by far one of the best pieces of management advice that I've ever received. And to be honest, it's still something that I'm working on today. I think probably a lot of people, this is something that they're constantly working on. A lot of times I think we feel like the vision needs to be polished and it needs to be in PowerPoint and the wording needs to be just right before we can share it with anybody, but it doesn't, okay? It just needs to be heard and reinforced. And trust me, there have been like so many times that I've talked with my team and it's just been like me kind of rambling and getting like really emotional and them kind of looking at me like, okay, like I think I'm getting this, but it's better to have those types of conversations continuously than to, again, kind of go away and then come back 6 months and be like, all right, guys, here's like the big PowerPoint presentation. It's important because when you're building something, the vision needs to be your constant. The strategy, which is how you will achieve the vision, is going to change, right? Like strategy needs to change because it means that you're listening to the market, you're talking with employees, and you're evolving based on feedback and input. If you fix vision and strategy, you're not going to survive. Ultimately, you're going to stagnate. So vision is constant and strategy is ever changing, and this is why it's really important that people hear that vision repeatedly because it serves as reassurance when that strategy does need to evolve. The important thing about your vision is that it needs to be authentic and relatable. So like you could go online and there are plenty of frameworks where you could just kind of plug in some words and great, here's my vision, or let me see what like Coca-Cola is doing and kind of modify that to what I want to do. But it needs to be authentic and it needs to be relatable. Who are you and what do you stand for? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? Why do you care about building a team? Like, why is this something that you want to come into work and do every day? Your people need to know that and they need to feel it. Because when they feel it, they're going to have a higher tolerance as things evolve. I love this quote, effective communication is 20% what you know and 80% how you feel about what you know. And certainly in the beginning and probably even 5 years later, you're not gonna know everything. But it's being really passionate about what you do know and helping people understand why that's important and why they should care about it. My vision has always been to build products that actually matter, to put things into the universe that people care about. There is so much bad software out there. And it's easy for teams to fall into the trap of defining software products that either can't be built, are not desired by users, or are not financially advantageous for the company. Like product management is all about solving for those 3 variables, business, design, and technology. Defining the right solution for the right group of people and delivering it within the optimal window of time. And that is incredibly difficult to do, right? Like if it were easy, there would be a lot more successful software products out there. But that was always the thing we were striving for as a product and design team. And our methods may have evolved over time, but that vision was constant. So don't get caught up in crafting the perfect communication and don't let that be the reason to not share your vision. Speak from the heart and people will get behind you. Okay, I imagine this is why most of you are here. So it's really important to me to end with my screw-ups. And this is because my path, to this point hasn't been perfect. It's not been easy. There have been mistakes. You will make mistakes, and that's okay. But it's really all about what you do with that will define the type of leader you will become. So there's a lot of material that I could pull from here, but for brevity's sake, I'm going to stick with 2. So there was that time that half the team almost quit. Not one of my finer moments, obviously, but this happened because there was a person on the team that just wasn't the right fit, okay? Like, I can't get into specifics, but it wasn't a fit. And up until this point, team cohesion had been outstanding. Everybody got along, but people felt comfortable challenging one another. And this person unfortunately changed the dynamic. You know, people started to dread meetings, they stopped sharing their opinions, and they really kind of retreated into their work. And I let it go on for too long. You know, as a manager, nothing is ever black and white. It's really easy to look at a situation from the outside and say, oh, this is what should have happened, and it, you know, should have happened months ago. But there's really a lot of gray. You know, if you fire somebody too early, your management could be called into question. You know, did you spend enough time coaching this person, developing a skill set? But if you wait too long, people actually start to think less of you as a manager, and you start to lose some respect. It's hard too, because as you grow, you become further removed from the work, and people don't want to rat out their colleagues. So it's hard to stay in tune with what's really happening versus what, you know, people are telling you is happening in one-on-ones. But you know when things feel off, and I knew, but I kept this person around almost to the detriment of the team. And when all was said and done, I found out later that several people were actually considering other opportunities because coming into work was such a painful experience for them. And thankfully nobody left, but we came close, and that was a really big wake-up call for me as a manager. You know, the lesson here is you need to continually seek out new ways to be in tune with your people. And as you grow, this is going to be more and more difficult. But do things like sit out on the floor, invite people on, you know, spontaneous coffee dates, and really pay attention to nonverbal cues. If there's a cancer within the team, you need to act quickly and you need to cut it. There are 3 warning signs that, you know, I would look out for. Number 1 is people who play the victim, so it's never not their fault. People who consistently point out problems but don't offer solutions, and people who don't invest the time in getting to know their teammates and their colleagues, and they really have just a disinterest in building relationships with their coworkers. There's a difference between coaching somebody up and developing a skill set and trying to change somebody's attitude and beliefs. And if it's the latter, you know, it may just be best to part ways. You need to understand what you can influence and what you cannot. All right, so there was also that time that it became like really hard to buy from us. And I want to take credit for that. Not all the credit, but I'm going to take a piece of it. And this is ultimately because I was trying to solve a problem that I didn't have, and that was scale. So we were a team of about 6 product strategists and 4 designers at the time. And this is right around the size where, you know, you're not like a small team anymore, but you're not a really large team. But people want things like a formal training program and lots of nice process documentation. And hey, it would be great if we had templates for all of our deliverables. We had just opened an office out in Denver. And I had people that had moved out to that location, and I really started to become consumed by this idea that if we were to double, there was going to be no consistency in our work, and how was I just going to keep a handle on quality? So I focused a lot on process. Now, you know, process is a good thing, but too much process creates a lot of overhead, and it starts to weigh you down. So, you know, what was happening was every time sales had a new opportunity, we had to like deliberate tirelessly over how we were going to make this work, because we had like defined this very specific box for which we were going to work within, and it really slowed down momentum. Sales was just spending way too much of their time trying to figure out how to frame up proposals, which should be like, great, once we get to that point, like, we're off and running, and they were really getting stuck in that piece of the process. Thankfully we saw what was happening, and we were able to course correct and really pull back a lot of layers before this became a really big problem. But there were gaps in our sales cycle, and we, felt the pain for sure. So the obvious lesson here is, don't solve problems you don't have. Focus on the problems you do have today. I didn't need to put processes in place for 20 people. I only had 10. And at that size, it's really better to focus on frameworks than standardization. Give people guideposts, set expectations for outcomes, and then get out of their way. Give your people the freedom and the flexibility to create, because when they have that ability, the work output is going to be much more inspired. Process doesn't make managing growth any easier. It's having a team of people that are inspired to come into the office every day and take this journey with you. And that needs to be the focus. So that concludes my talk for today. You can follow me on Twitter at Erika L. Carney. And if you're interested in some further reading, I have several blog posts up on Medium that pertain to some of the topics that we covered today. So at this point, I'll open it up for any questions. Any questions? Yes.
So I think those are all wonderful points, and I feel like one of the biggest problems can be getting so caught up in the details that you forget to think about those broader perspectives. Mm-hmm. So do you have any advice about how you kind of pull yourself up to that level to be able to think about these instead of getting caught up in the details?
Yeah, so I think, for me, something that I like to do is just like get out of the office and like weirdly not have a plan for what I'm gonna do that day. Like maybe it's just like walking aimlessly, like in Philip's place, or just, grabbing coffee for somewhere. But, I find that when I think about like strategy, none of the good ideas ever come when I say, all right, I'm gonna like go in a conference room here and I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna work on this plan. It's always when I'm in my car leaving work and I'm like sitting on 77, or it's like right before I'm about to go to bed. It's those really inconvenient moments that I feel like I have the best ideas. So what I try and do is plan for days where I can just maybe have that like spontaneous ideation. So that's kind of my tip. Anybody else? No? All right, well, thank you guys so much for coming out today and braving the winter storm. I appreciate it.